Amen. You see, I can do a teaching less than 60 minutes. You're now going to get the 45-minute afterburn. I'm kidding. All right, so I'm hoping that little separate little rabbi trail is making sense. It's tying some things together. Because when we get back to Proverbs, you'll understand why this is going on. And the rest of the chapter of chapter 5, as we go through it, you'll see that understanding this whole bitterness, wormwood thing is critical to understand what Solomon's talking about. Okay, and I believe it's really what Yah is talking about through Solomon. Okay? All right, so this is what we call the afterburn. If you have any comments or questions, you can raise your hand, and Nate will bring around the mic. If you're on live stream, Kurt will take care of that, and just make note of your comments or questions. Let's try to keep them to this teaching in particular. If I touched on something that wasn't, I don't know what the word is, like pivotal to this teaching itself, or core to this, I may send you to a teaching that does deal with that. I did do that during the teaching here. Please go listen to those first, and then if you still have questions, you can call, like the points I made about the Ruach and listening to the understanding of the Ruach teaching, those kind of things. Okay, Amy, go ahead and get us started.
Okay, I just wanted to thank you for bringing this out, and it reminded me of something I thought about maybe a couple of months ago when I was reading through the Torah portion. So hopefully I can get my thoughts together here. I can't remember where I was reading, but I saw myself, I'm like, wow, the realization came that, well, I know I'm an Israelite, but what does that mean? It means I'm a foreigner in the, like, walking through this nation that Yahweh doesn't know. Like, I don't know how to say it really well. But it gave me a better understanding of why I want to heed your counsel and remember the teachings that you give to us through the Torah and through the scriptures. Because most of the time I'm on my own by myself when I'm at work or at home, and I have to hold myself to that standard that Yahweh expects from me, especially being somebody who has made the decision to be in his covenant. So I just wanted to thank you and say I appreciate your strong leadership and that you're always reminding us what to do, because it just helps me be, I guess, an Israelite in a foreign nation, if you will. I don't know how else to say it. So it was just basically a comment, and I appreciated that we went back over those scriptures because I find them to be very encouraging when I'm in situations at work where I'm, there by myself in this small office, and people decide, well, I don't want to work, I want to be on Facebook, or I want to be texting, or whatever, and I have to think, well, what am I supposed to be doing? I'm supposed to be here working. And so sometimes I've had moments where it feels kind of awkward because I'm the only one working, but that's where I've gotten encouragement from other people here. It said, well, you just do what you're supposed to do, or I hear your voice, and that encourages me. So I appreciate that.
Amen. Thank you so much. Appreciate that. And that's really the strongest encouragement that I want you to get out of what Amy said is that you are responsible for you. And so you need to be doing what you need to be doing. I've often said to my wife, and I've said it to my children and those who are friends of mine, there are times where I've gone to do something, and they'll be like, well, why are you doing that? Even that person won't appreciate this or that. I said, because I always believe that doing the right thing, it needs to be done because it's the right thing. And it doesn't matter if the other person is, but they're not going to appreciate it or they're not going to do the right thing. Doesn't matter. I've got to do the right thing. And so you need to be that way too. You need to do the right thing because it's the right thing. How do we know what the right thing is? Well, Torah tells us what's right. And if Torah says you need to be that good worker that's giving, your full attention to your job when you're on work, and those hours that you're there are not yours, they belong to your employer, and you're there on his clock or her clock, then you need to be making sure that during that time, your attention is on their things. Okay? So excellent point, Amy. Okay, Daweed.
While you were talking, I made possibly another connection. I'm not sure if it's independent of what you were thinking, and you may be deciding to go there eventually. I don't know. But when I was reading that, and you started talking about wormwood, and then you started talking about approaching the false prophets thing and everything else, I started making connections to Revelation, because in Proverbs it says that you may regard discretion. For the lips of a strange woman drop as an honeycomb, and her mouth is smoother than oil. A strange woman was often in the sense of a prostitute. And when you go into Revelation 17, when it talks about Mystery Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and abominations of the earth, she's very beguiling. She's very much has the cup of her fornications and everything else. And so I just thought that was possibly a connection to what you're talking about.
Absolutely. I mean, look, if we had, I don't know if that's actually a right say. I was going to say if we had the time. I guess we do have the time, but I mean, I'm trying to get so many different things done. If we had the time, everything that we start studying could lead us into side trails that can go deeper into any one point. And we could spend a whole day just on a verse and breaking down all of the connections that verse or that idea could take you to. And that would be one of them. And there are lots of verses that talk about the, look, I didn't go there and I wasn't planning to, but, we could also go to the woman that's suspected of cheating is made to drink waters, okay? And it connects, but it doesn't exactly, so I didn't go there, but certainly you could see how that could connect and how that kind of is one of those things as well, because here Yahweh's saying, well, I suspect you guys of cheating, and I know you've cheated, so I'm going to make you drink those bitter waters, and I know what that's going to show, okay? And so we could make that connection as well. Okay, who's next? I call on Nate. Can you bring Nate the mic?
So I've got a ton of things. I'm going to try to keep it limited to a few things. So you brought up the what almost sounded like the unpardonable sin. Where would that be included in the unrepentance and thinking that I'm at peace with this? I can do.
Correct.
Okay. All right. I was like, pa-ding. Anyway. So also in Revelation in chapter 8, it talks about wormwood.
We'll get there.
And I kind of thought you'd probably get, because it uses the word there, so I'm like, he's going to get there eventually.
We're still going to get to finish Jeremiah, Amos, and Revelation, so we're going to catch those.
So one of the things that really popped into my head is as we were in the wilderness, before Abba opened my eyes and ears about Shabbat and Torah observance, and then more importantly now coming under this leadership about leadership and learning honor and shame and being respectful to my brothers and sisters, not only here but also everywhere. Being careful not to bring, it's like, don't do like you did when you passed through those nations. Don't be rebellious. Don't be disrespectful. Don't dishonor. And a lot of the things that I look back on my past as even throughout my whole life of being dishonorable or bringing that bitterness, now that you bring a different perspective than the one that I understood about connecting it to covenant, as Yahweh brings our leadership forward, are we going to return back to that way of thinking that we can be disrespectful and dishonorable about who we select to where we've done our vetting and we're like, okay, this is going to be my teacher, I'm going to stick to this? Are we going to be rebellious like Korach or all these other folks that, when we see something that we don't like, we listen to these waters that are, what did it say? I don't have it right in front of me, but it talks about the fountain spewing forth these bitter waters. Are we going to listen to these things that tickle our ears to try to draw us away from where we know we're supposed to go, but we're so used to where we were, we want to eat the leeks.
Yep.
And want to go back to that. So would that be a good connection to that with one?
And we're going to probably address, I think we'll probably address some of that next week with this whole part about, because we're going to deal with leadership quite a bit in the next part. Okay, and how leadership is viewed by Yah, good leadership versus bad leadership, and how that fits in with wormwood and covenant.
All right. Because
Jeremiah 23 is all addressing the blame going towards the leadership. And the people also being blamed for following wrong leadership and all that kind of stuff. So we'll cover that.
It also mentions about the curses about being plagued when people walk through and they see this and why are these people being plagued and have sickness and so on and so forth. Another thing that came to mind was as we came out of where we were, we brought a lot of that junk with us, our rebelliousness and all that stuff. And as people look at us, as we've come to observe our Father in a way that we didn't understand before concerning his Torah and his covenant, they still see within us the bickering and the plagues that we brought, all those plagues of disrespect and dishonor and all that stuff. And they walk through here and through the Messianic and go, what in the world? They're just as, I'm going to go back over here because they're just as backbiting and disrespectful to leadership as they were over there. At least we had some honor. Could we relate that as to the plagues and sickness?
Absolutely. Look, I think I mentioned it even last week, the idea that, a lot of people go from place to place and they forget the fact that every time you show up, you're bringing you. And so that's the common factor everywhere you go. And so if you're not growing, changing, and becoming more Yeshua-like, then all the issues that you had in one place, you'll probably have in the other place because you're bringing you and all that mess. People wonder, well, how come, we see all these groups splitting and all this other stuff happening and all this division within the Messianic community? I said, because it comes from the Christian community. Almost everybody in this community came from that community, and that community had all the splittings and divisions and everything else. That's why there's how many thousands of denominations, okay? And that's why you can go here in the South and you can find, 4 Baptist churches on 4 different corners. And they all started as one. And then those people come into this with that same mindset. And so sure. And by the way, you don't really see this as much in the Jewish community. I don't remember, all my years growing up in the Jewish community, seeing congregations split. I saw congregations merge because of a lack of, the community was shrinking or people were getting older and dying off and they needed to kind of, come together, and I've seen them merge together. I haven't seen a whole lot of splitting like you would see in the Christian community. It's just that they just don't do that. And so, but since the majority of the body of Messianic believers comes from out of Christianity, they bring with them whatever makes that happen. And it's an emotional thing that's a challenge that has to be overcome. Okay. Live stream.
Okay, Janet Hoffman says, Rabbi, thanks for this teaching. Could you please give us some examples of worldly things that we can get tempted to apply into our relationship with Yah so we can be careful to stay away from them? Worldly temptations. Yeah.
Well, it's not so much worldly temptations. It's more like, because the way you worded the question was, look, there's 2 different categories of things. There's worldly temptations, meaning things that are of the world that have nothing to do with Yah, and you still want to do them, and they're not a part of the covenant. And then there's things that the world will do to worship their Elohim, and now you're going to do it thinking you're using it as a way to worship him. Okay? Like the people that still might have their Christmas trees, or they may do other things like that. That's coming from a world pagan system that was brought into Christianity, which started off being the Messianic community and then got altered and bent and twisted through the perverting of, look at Christianity. There's your exact perfect example. Christianity is the result of syncretism, which is where you take things of the world, how the world worship their gods, and you bring it into your system. And that's what Christianity essentially has become. That's where Christmas, Easter, and all these other things came out of. All right? And we're seeing Halloween get stuck in there as well and other things starting. You're watching that process evolve of syncretizing another thing in that doesn't belong. Okay, so on the one hand, going out and drinking yourself into a stupor and partying, on a Saturday night and wearing, really, inappropriate clothing and all that, that's worldly behavior, but that's not worldly behavior worshiping your Creator. That's just worldly behavior. But then there's behavior where you're deciding, I'll give you an example. You decide that you want to wear rainbow tzitzit. Let me get everybody mad at me. Okay? Why? Because you believe that that's okay and other people believe that's okay, and now you're starting to attribute that to him when I don't see that in Scripture, so I think that's a mistake. but you're doing it thinking you're doing it for him. And there's a lot of stuff like that that's going on, where people are imposing or self-imposing. When I say imposing, meaning imposing on others around them, or self-imposing. And so even though he didn't say it, and that's not the way he intended it, but it's being brought in because of others bringing it in. And so it's hard for me to give you examples of it. The best thing to do is call for counsel about things you're doing to see if what you're doing is, a lot of the stuff that you need to be doing, we address it from the microphone already. It's those things that have not been addressed, okay? But part of it also has to do with if I've addressed it, if your teacher, whoever you're with, is addressing something and you see it differently and want to go in a different direction, that's the warning sign that one of you is probably wrong, because you can't both be right. So now you got to figure out, actually both of you could be wrong, okay? But one thing you can't be is both right. Okay, and that kind of a thing. So you may want to find out, the teacher, I get calls like this all the time. The teacher at our congregation said blah, 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 that we need to do this, 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 and I don't think that's probably what we need to be doing. My first question is, if you have a teacher and you're in a congregation, why are you calling me? You need to talk to that teacher and work it out that way, because I can't fix that for you. If I tell you your teacher's wrong, I'm only going to create a problem in your congregation with you. And if I tell you your teacher's right, well, it's really not me to do it. You're in a different thing. So, but that's not to say you shouldn't call, but you got to realize you can't be sitting in two camps. If your teacher is going in a direction you don't feel comfortable with, then you need a new teacher. And that's not to look for the ear-tickling one. It has to do with objectively, with discretion and discernment, figuring out that that teacher's just going in a direction that's not where you need to go. A logical, rational, unemotional decision. If your emotions are driving, don't make that decision until the emotions are no longer driving. Well, he made me mad, or he upset me, or I don't like it. No, now your emotions are driving, not the right time to make the decision. Calm down first so you can think clearly, make a logical, rational decision, so it's not emotionally driven. Okay? Next question.
All right, from Nick Goddard, question is Proverbs 4:24, perverse lips. Is this limited to speech, or could we expand like in Matthew 5:21 and 22?
Well, Matthew 5:21 and 22 is talking about taking the knowledge of Torah more deeply. So, well, you've heard of old, it says not to murder. I'm going to tell you what it really means. Perverse lips are not in there, it's just an uneducated lip. I mean, the person is literally, letter of the law, not murdering. And he's saying, well, the intention of that law was deeper than that. So that's an instructional level. The perverse lips of Proverbs is really talking about those that are trying to convince you, oh, no, it doesn't mean all that. It just means this letter thing. Okay, someone who knows better and is trying to teach differently or twisting or bending. You know what it sounds like a lot? Well, he knows in my heart. Anything after that sentence is usually wrong. Okay? If you start a sentence off, well, God knows my heart, or this one knows my heart, anything goes after that is you already are trying to justify something that's a perverted, twisting, misrepresentation of what he really said to try to justify what you want. Not always, 99% of the time. I mean, I'm sure that someone's going to say, well, I don't, okay, so maybe there's an exception there. But almost every time I've ever heard that, it's somebody trying to say I have peace in my stubborn heart. That's really what it is. Well, he knows my heart and blah, blah, blah. Well, he does, and that's why you should be scared. You shouldn't be all defending yourself saying, well, he knows my heart. No, he knows your heart. Be afraid, be very afraid. Okay, no, he knows why you're really wanting to do or not do. You're not fooling him. You may think you're fooling me, you're probably fooling yourself. You're not fooling him. All right, next question.
All right, so Elisa Holmes, so the wormwood thing is kind of like the quail thing. He gave them quail after their murmur but since some, not clear sentences, but since some leanness into their souls.
Wormwood is, again, it's an idiomatic phrase here. It's not a literal phrase to make the point that these are people that are going in a direction that ultimately will be embittering It's a bitter type of thing. It's going to lead to bad results. It's going to lead to you being bitter about the whole thing. A lot of people end up in a place where they start now blaming Yah for everything, and they blame the Creator, and they get all angry towards Him, and there's bitterness, or you have bitterness towards your brother. And it talks about that root of bitterness and how it can cause all kinds of havoc in your life. And so that's the metaphor of wormwood. Okay? So it's really a metaphor. Does it have to do with the quail? Well, the quail situation was a response to the wormwood idiom. They were whining and complaining and not satisfied. So he says, fine, you want meat? I'll give you meat till it comes out of your nose and you die. Okay? Be careful what you whine and complain about. He may give it to you in a form you're not really wanting. So I think it was the wormwood attitude that led to that problem. So that connection is good from that point of view. Go ahead.
All right. Cheryl wants to know, can we be drawn in, parentheses, drawn in, be as simple as purchasing unkosher items for uncovenanted family members?
No, I mean, look, if you are the husband, okay, then you have a responsibility to watch over your house and your house to be a certain way. If you are the wife and your husband is not covenanted and your husband wants you to pick up the unclean food when you do your shopping, well, picking it up for him is not the same as you consuming it. You have a different relational problem there. So yes, you would still, as part of that relationship, you really should counsel, because it sounds more like again, one of those marriage family things that has its unique aspects that needs counsel. But no, it's not that. Now, of course, if you're buying it and then or dealing with it and attempted to eat it yourself, that is a different problem. All right? But ladies, you have a different situation. You are demonstrating your submissiveness and your authority structure to our Creator, even if you're in an uncovenanted marriage, an uncovenanted or unequally yoked marriage, because odds are pretty good that you started off covenanted, or not covenanted, but equally yoked when you got married. Wherever you both were, you're on the same page. Whether you were in the world, whether you were in Christianity, whether you were Buddhist, whether you're this, doesn't matter. Whatever you were, you probably were the same when you got married. But since then, only one of you has had your eyes opened, which creates all kinds of challenges. And it's not easy, but just don't let it turn into any kind of bitterness. Okay? But the temptation would be to justify something. Like, I'll give you an example. The person who has a job and the boss decided now you're going to have to work Saturdays even though you didn't have to do it before. And then the person says to me, well, of course I'm going to work Saturday because Yahweh wouldn't want me to get fired and not be able to take care of my family. So how did you get to that conclusion? Just because you got fired doesn't mean you can't get a different job? You can't do something else? You can't provide for your family a different way? But I've had people say to me, well, he wouldn't want me to get fired and lose my job and not be able to take care of my family. Okay, there's a whole bunch of assumptions in there that are just not correct. But that's the bending and twisting that can get you in trouble. Because now you're trying to justify doing something you shouldn't do. Okay? Now, I'm not telling everybody that has a Saturday job to quit it tomorrow. But you should, if we're having the same conversation and you're still in that job 6 months, a year from now, and you haven't made that effort to get out, then you're really not serious. I hate to pick on you that way. And probably most of you with those jobs don't even like those jobs, have whined about those jobs, and now you have a chance to leave that job, and all of a sudden you love your job. I've had people converse with me and say how much they hate their job and wish they could leave. Then their boss changes their thing where they have to work on Saturdays. Like, there's your opportunity. Like, oh, no, I can't leave my job. I love this job. What are you talking about? You hate that job. Abba opened up the door for you to leave. Don't you trust he can give you a better job? Anybody, you don't have to raise your hand. Anybody ever leave a job and find that Abba provided them with a better job? Okay? Happens all the time. Next question.
All right, from Pat Novaki. Have always thirsted for truth after seeking such for 30 years in 4 churches. Study of Torah is quenching it. Can you elaborate upon the verse, drunkenness affecting our thirst?
No, it's not drunkenness affecting the thirst. It's like here you are. It's like, okay, you tell me that... Let me just think of a good analogy. It's just saying that I need A and I'm going to give you B and say somehow that's going to fix the problem. All right? All right, so you got a cut on your hand, and you say, can I have a Band-Aid? And I hand you an apple. Well, how's that going to help me with my need? I need a Band-Aid. Okay, when you're thirsty, the metaphor throughout Scripture is thirsty for the Word, thirsty for what Yah has to provide. Drunkenness means that you're drinking, putting all kinds of other beverages in you that are not going to actually quench your thirst. It's just going to make you more goofy and more wrong and more out there doing things you shouldn't be doing. So it's giving the wrong thing. Here's a person that's adding drunkenness to their thirst. And now not only are you thirsty, but you're stumbling all over the place drunk. So you haven't fixed your problem, you made it worse. Okay? So it's almost actually like saying, here's my cut, and I give you, instead of like an ointment to put on it, I give you salt. It's only going to hurt. It's going to sting. It's going to, you know what I'm saying? It's not what you really wanted there. And so let's see that it's not comparing drunkenness with thirst. It's saying you're already thirsty. You realize you have a need, and now you're going to make the situation worse by getting drunk on the other stuff, on the wrong stuff, the wrong information, the wrong solutions. Hopefully that helps. Next question.
All right, it's from M2I Lakeview. Would it be proper to say that the wormwood and bitterness is like a mindset and or approach to the Almighty and walking out the Torah?
Correct. That was easy. Next question.
Let's see. All right, this is from Nick Goddard. Rabbi connected wormwood in Proverbs 5:4 to Deuteronomy 29. Does this also connect to Exodus 17:7, Psalm 95, and Hebrews 4:7? And he follows up with where we are not happy today with what we have in Elohim, but grumble and seek others.
Yes. Because it's also referring back to what happened in Massa and Meribah. It talks about where the waters of bitterness. It's always about that. Okay? It's always about you not, look, if we look at the context of when we read Deuteronomy 29 for context, is he said, look, I did all this for you. Why is that not enough to get your attention to trust me on everything else? So I didn't go to all the references that person gave, but I'm sure they're all similar, where it talks about the idea of the waters of bitterness, where they whined and complained without a cause and that kind of a thing. Okay? So absolutely. Okay, we're good. All right, let's go get the children. Wait, Nate's got his hand up.
If I may, just an encouragement to everybody that's here and online or whatever.
In the meantime, Raph, why don't you go upstairs and get the kids?
You
get the adult. Okay, you get the adult kids. Okay, good. Sorry. Go ahead.
You made a couple of corrective statements about, one was about tzitzit and one was about Shabbat. And I just wanted to encourage us not to develop that bitterness and that rejection to that. And it brought back memories of my early time in the military. And we had regulations about how we wore our uniform and how we carried ourselves. Now, one of the things that we like to do, especially as young soldiers, was either to wear our hats a particular way that was independent of what the regulations were, or different types of boots or whatever, or change to our uniform that was not in regulation. And I know that sometimes if you're walking around with that uniform like that, if you walk past an officer, your rank could be just a little bit out of place or tilted just a little bit right, or your hat was creased just a little different, or your hair was a little bit too long. That officer can approach you and say, son, your stuff is out of regulation. I expect you to get that fixed. Now, I could choose to be, if it was innocent, more than likely I went, oh, I didn't know that. Probably, and I know from experience it was because I saw somebody else, probably a high-ranked officer or somebody that I really respected as a sergeant or a teacher or whatever, instructor. And so I was like, wow, that looks really cool. I'm going to do that. And so I, as an innocent, and this major or whoever approached me, I could go, oh, I didn't understand it. And I have the choice to go either, oh, I can fix it and just do that. Or I could say, well, this other person did that, so that's why I did that, make an excuse. Or I could become rebellious and go, I'll get it fixed. If we're in my heart, I'm really thinking, nah, I'm not really going to do that. And so the first time it could have been innocent. The second time that officer catches you out of regulation, he he might be a little more stern. This time, Rabbi is always gentle with how he does his correction. I've never run into him where he kind of approaches you and gets in your, unless you're under certain counsel. If you have a relationship with him, that's different. But the second time that officer may catch you, he may take it as rebellion and may give you counsel. And then the third time, he may even take you before the court or in Article 15. So I just wanted to encourage all of us, if it's in the regulation, if our Father says, hey, this is what I expect of you as we come under leadership, we may want to heed that gentle correction, because we don't want to get correction from our Father. Now, if our leadership is in error, then our Father will correct that. Our job is to be humble and to receive that correction. Is that correct, Rabbi?
Yes, let me ask you a question. Hold the mic. Am I correct from a military point of view that by the second or third time, the issue is no longer the uniform, it's the insubordination?
Absolutely.
Okay? See, no longer is it the effort to go before anybody higher up to decide whether or not it really was a problem, how long your hair was, or the crease in your hat. It now was because the officer had approached you more than once, told you what to do, and you didn't listen. Okay? See, and that's where the higher problem becomes in our understanding of Scripture and our relationship with our Creator, is this idea of insubordination, of lack of submission to authority. And we, especially in America, have a real prideful problem with submitting under authority. Okay? Because, after all, we established this country from breaking out from under authority. But then again, that was the whole thing with Israel. They broke out from under Pharaoh. Of course, they didn't do it. Yahweh did it and brought them out. But now they're all like, hey, I'm free now. Nobody tells me what to do. And so we have to be really, really aware of the potential to fall into that trap. Okay? And realize that if I correct you on something, especially if it's more than once, it's no longer going to be in Yahweh's eyes about whether or not the thing that we're talking about gets done or not. It's about how you are handling leadership. And Yah's watching that. Okay? And that's why I said the military example is a pretty good one, where you can see like, oh, and by the way, that's also for the lady that asked, whoever asked about, give us examples about how we could be tempted into doing some things in a worldly way. He's in the military. He sees a higher ranking person with their hat a certain way or something with the boots or whatever it was, thinks, hey, it must be okay to do that. After all, he's a higher ranking person and I'm impressed and it looks cool. I'm going to do what he does. And now he knows it's not regulation though. Okay, he knows it's not regulation, but he's said, well, it must be okay because he's doing it. And that's where we start to drift in our Torah observance. You find somebody else leading, teaching a different way, but it fits what you'd rather do because you like it, it's appealing, and so you drift in that direction, even though you know that's not what you originally understood it to mean. Okay, so you got to be careful with those things. Thank you, Nate. That's a good analogy, a good metaphor for that. All right, I think we got all the children in, right? Everybody's down? Okay, good.